Hello everyone. We've decided to do some videos for the Covens of New Orleans. I guess you could call it Interview with the Coven. So as you know, we're Alexandrian, and in Alexandrian witchcraft, a tradition that was started by Alex and Maxine is to hold soirees. And soirees were a time when people would gather in Alex and Maxine's home and, ask questions, meet some of the coven members, and sort of discover a little bit about witchcraft. So we do hold soirees in the New Orleans Coven about quarterly. Some of us have wanted to do it more, maybe we will. But right now we're doing it quarterly, and we usually do it at a place in the French Quarter called Potions, which is owned by the vampire of New Orleans, Marita Carmel, or Marita Crandall, sorry Marita. She's a wonderful person. She owns the vampire store down in the quarter, and she owns Potions, which is a very magical shop and a very magical bar. So we frequent there. It's our favorite haunt, and you get to meet lots of different occultists at Potions. However, because we do have an internet presence, we thought it might be fun to let you in a little bit into ourselves. So starting with me, we're going to have interviews with some of the coven members, and then perhaps some other witchcraft guests, friends, people who arrive or that we meet, to give you sort of an inside scoop into these people's lives. Now, when you go into the New Orleans Coven Facebook page, you'll see a beautiful picture of our beautiful coven, and we look a little bit like a satanic carnival because it's kind of true. The magical super friends. This isn't every member of the New Orleans Coven. We have private members, we have secret members, and we have members who just aren't public witches, and they don't necessarily want to be put out there like that. What is unique about our coven, however, is we have several members who are public witches. They've done TV, myself included, written books. We've got 2 authors in the coven right now. Several shop owners and people who own different magical businesses, whether it's online or a brick and mortar store. Many of us do workshops at festivals. Some of us create products. We've got people who do readings. So they're all of their own right, whether it's having clients and doing astrology, working the craft in a public way. So they've already got themselves out there. So we thought, oh, okay, we've got enough people to do this that we can do this. We realized it might come off a little vain to some, but I also thought it was terribly exciting. So we're hoping that the Coven page and these interviews help enlighten some people into what we do as Alexandrian witches. We don't want to represent all of Alexandrian craft because I think very few individuals could do that, Alex and Maxine being among them. But we can express what we've learned and how we function, and what it is we do in the craft that we've learned and in the world of Alexandrian witchcraft. So one of our coven members, Austin Shippey, is going to interview me today. Austin, I'm ready for the interview.
Okay.
Yes. Do I look good on camera? Do I look good?
Yes, yes.
I hate cameras, everyone. Yeah.
It looks better than 90% of my videos, so. The first question is, tell us about yourself and how you came to live in New Orleans.
Well, as most of you know, I'm Brian Cain. I own 3 witchcraft shops, 2 in Salem, Massachusetts, Omen and Hex, and 1 here in my home city of New Orleans. Me and my husband, Christian Day, also host 2 festivals, the Festival of the Dead in Salem, Massachusetts, and Hex Fest, which will be coming up this summer in New Orleans. I entered the craft at a very early age. I started, Tiki, don't you start just because I'm on camera. Come over here and say hi to the people. He's very attention-oriented here. He saw his reflection. Tiki, say hello. Yes, and he's very bossy. Yes, you've got to be nice to me. Yeah, don't show off in front of the camera. When I was about 15 years old, I really started working the craft. I'd had interest in it beforehand, and I was under the tutelage of my first teacher at 17, and I was initiated into the craft. I think I was 19 years old when the initiation actually took place. She wouldn't officially start working with me until I was 18 for legal reasons. We do work sometimes in the nude. That was the beginning of my journey into the craft, and I worked in covens in Washington for over 25 years. I came to a place, like many of us do, where I wanted to hit the reset button, and I looked at where I wanted to move to, where I wanted to go, and I wanted to move to a magical city. And I actually did look at Salem, Massachusetts and New Orleans, London, but I had to be a little realistic. I wasn't ready for London yet. Although since then, I've really fallen in love with Bath, England. I need to go back though, one visit isn't enough. So I chose New Orleans because it was exotic and it was different and there was no snow. You know, I really wanted to be in a place where there was no snow and where it was nice most of the time. However, I have come to discover it still has a bitter cold, but fortunately we only have to suffer that for a small amount of time. Though these days I think I get cold when it gets into the 60s, I'm freezing. So here in New Orleans is where, I think my magic truly began to blossom in a new way, and I ended up seeking reinitiation into Alexandrian witchcraft, and I was initiated right here in the Temple of New Orleans. And since that time, the New Orleans Coven has grown, and we've met initiates all over the world. We also have initiates visit us from all over the world and celebrate in the temple, come to Hexfest, witches from all over the world, they're not all Alexandrians. And I think it's a very magical place. So I suppose that tells you a little bit something about me. Yeah.
Why did you found the New Orleans Coven?
I think I just slipped into that a little bit, didn't I? I founded the New Orleans Coven because there wasn't a coven here. When I first came to New Orleans, I had been running a coven for 25 years, and I had resigned as high priest because I was moving, and I'm still in contact with those people. Some of them have actually gone on to become Alexandrian as well, they're friends of mine, these witches. And I came here and I was solitary for an entire year, and this is before I was initiated Alexandrian. And I would work as well as I could, but you may not be a witch alone. The craft doesn't work well. The rituals that we have were not designed for solitary practice. So when I became initiate, there wasn't another coven here. So I had explored all the other groups here, and there was some ridiculous groups and some pagan groups, things that really didn't interest me. But it wasn't because I came here with that agenda. When I first came here, I thought, maybe I'll learn voodoo. I was really wanting to explore magic for myself, and I was looking forward to actually not being in any kind of position of teaching and leadership. But after a year of being solitary and not finding an alternative and realizing voodoo wasn't for me, after initiation and after I received my second and third, I set about to start the New Orleans Coven, and I was immediately blessed. The first priestess to join me was Carrie Ewers, followed by Christine Stevens, and the three of us started the New Orleans Coven together. And since that time, we've just had marvelous, wonderful initiates, come to this temple, and I always say that you learn more from your students than you do from anywhere else, because they ask you questions that you didn't ask yourself, and it forces you to explore the things that you don't understand or you don't know. So I'm very blessed. I also think it had found its time. It was time for Alexandrian craft to come to New Orleans. Everything happens in its own time. The cycles of nature, I suppose.
What does being an Alexandrian mean to you?
Beauty, freedom, power. There's a history to it, Now that I look back at my path, which is not over, and I'm still discovering, and who knows, when I'm 70, the story may change. But as I look back at my path so far, I think everything really led me to becoming an Alexandrian witch. I remember at 15 years old reading What Witches Do, and I had the first edition, and Maxine was on the cover, This is one of the first books that I read about traditional initiatory craft. And I was really fascinated with both Alex and Maxine. Now, I did go on to focus more on Gardnerian because I think when you're interested in traditional craft, you think, oh, it's the oldest, you know. Now I don't look at it that way because I think, well, which Gardnerian line are you talking about? Because not all of them are older than Alexandrian. Many of them are not. The original ones were, 10 years older. It depends on when you say Alex actually started. Some people say he started much earlier than when they came out. So when he was working the craft within a coven structure, just hadn't become public yet. Certainly Alexandrian hadn't been coined. I think they're both beautiful systems that function in the same fertility cult, but Alexandrian has its own egregore, its own entrance into the mystery traditions, its own bridge to the occult, and an emphasis on freedom and beauty and power. When you talk to any of the old ones, one of the first things that you'll hear them say is power. One of the first things they'll ask about it was, a power there? Did you feel power? Because that's what we're really doing as witches. If you go into a circle and you don't feel any power, well, then what's the point? There's nothing to work with. If you don't feel power in your own circles, then you better get to work and make it a priority. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Can you share with us a personal magical success story?
Well, there's many, I wouldn't believe in magic if it didn't work. I've been doing it too long, and I suppose occasionally the logical mind comes in, and you've become a doubting Thomas, but then you go into the circle and you work for something and it manifests and you're not surprised, but you're always a little thrilled, There's been so many, but since we're talking about the New Orleans Coven, I think coming here was a real magical story because I had set about doing a work to come here and to change my life. And without giving full details of the work, I incorporated some Solomonic ideas with craft ideas, went a little old school cunning folk, and I combined occult principles and good old craft to do a work using the Wheel of the Year. And I started in around May Day, which is a time of activation, a time for us to really work for manifestation. And I used the Wheel of the Year because I knew this was a big project. I was going to change my life. And I set about in motion that I was going to move to New Orleans and start a new life, magically. And then I made it, I made it everything. Everything I did at work, everything I did at home, everything I was going to do was about this transformation. And I had spoken to Christian Day. I don't know if I'd spoken to him yet on the phone. No, I think I had spoken to him on the phone once and we'd become Facebook friends. But there was no romantic lenience on my end, He'd flirted a little bit, but nothing, there was no relationship. Mostly he, discussed with me my interests in, the craft and what I was interested in doing, and I'd asked him some questions about his craft. So mostly it was a friendship, an online friendship in a craft. And, when I decided to move to New Orleans, he was living here half time, and I knew I'd meet him, and it was nice to know somebody that was going to be here that was interested in witchcraft. That was a sort of security, but I was moving over with a roommate. In fact, I'd roped two into it, Sometimes, witches can be very selfish, so I was a little insecure about moving here, so I said, I can't go alone, who can I get to do it? So perhaps I fascinated them into going. But, I'm kind, so I wouldn't really ever force anyone in. So one person decided that wasn't what they wanted to do, and me and Patrick moved up here. Everything unfolded for me, though. It was just like New Orleans, and we say this now, she will either embrace you like a python that you'll never get away from, or she'll spit you out. And I've seen this over and over again. When people come to New Orleans, they are either drawn back or they're spit out and they never want anything to do with it. I find people who are of a magical inclination, though, they continually want to come here. Aleister Crowley said in his book, The Green Goddess, anyone who's ever going to be anyone in the occult will eventually come to New Orleans. It does have a draw, it's a place of power. I think this interview is supposed to be much shorter than I'm making it.
It's really good, no. Who are your top 3 goddesses and why?
That's always a really hard one. You know, my top goddess would be the secret name of the goddess, which I'm not prepared to divulge here. But for high priesthood who might be watching, you know how the pagan, movement sort of likes to do your patron deities. It's kind of coming off from Catholicism. Which ones do you work with? It's a big thing nowadays. I did that when I was younger and I could switch them. I'd say, oh, this is my patron, this is my patron. But my first patron, actually, one of my first patrons is our goddess. And I've never revealed that, but I thought that was very interesting how I was drawn to her before I knew who she was. So I'll say that one, the secret goddess. So the goddess name for, witches is definitely on the top, not just because she is, but because she actually resonates with me. After that, I'd have to say the two big mamas for me are Isis and Diana. I know that's very typical, but it's the truth, Of course, there are other goddesses I'm drawn to. The Morgu. I don't work with her so much anymore, but she resonates with me. And Morgan Le Fay, which I kind of look at as the same, but not everyone would agree with me, Queen of the Fairies. Athena has always really responded to me, and I was blessed to go to Bath and see the Temple of Solis Minerva, and of course this year I'm going to go to Athens. I don't regularly work with Athena, but I will say whenever I have asked her for something, which has always come in the form of protection or strategy, she's always been very favorable. Yeah.
Who was your favorite witchcraft elder and why?
It's hard to pick a favorite based on who's inspired me. I was inspired by many of them. I value all of the elders. But Maxine Sanders, I shouldn't call her an elder. I don't like the title elder sometimes because you're calling people old. She's a senior priestess. Well, senior's not a good one either, is it? She's a co-founder of the Alexandrian tradition. I've actually met her, and I've actually worked with her. I haven't met or worked with any of the others, but I've been inspired by many of them. I'd have to say it's Maxine Sanders. After her, I'd say it'd have to be Alex and Doreen Valiente because her poetry always inspired me. But all of them do, I think some people get a little weirded out that I'm not that interested in Gerald Gardner, I would have loved to have met him, but I don't find him particularly fascinating, but I completely admire and honor him for the work that he did, and I think the gods worked through him. Maybe it's just because he's such an old man that I just don't know that I would have been drawn. But Patricia Crowther, if it wasn't for the fact that she'd hate me for being Alexandrian, I'd love to meet her. And all of them, Lois Bourne, who just passed away, Ray Bone, I said Bourne, not Bone, right? But all of them are interesting to me, but I don't know them. I could meet them and not like them, but I've met Maxine and I am impressed with her, and she is so open and patient with people on some levels that I am not, I'm not always tolerant to people. If I don't like somebody enough, I'll just dismiss them, banish them from my world. And I'm not saying that I'm wrong for doing that. I think it's everyone's divine right to choose who's going to be in their field of existence. However, the fact that she allows some of these people to stay in her grace is something I admire and learn from, and how patient she is with people publicly. When we go to some of the public events, sometimes I want to run away, It's not out of snobbery, it's because I'm actually quite a private person. But she will stay to the very end and talk to everyone, and I'm like, oh, I should do that, I should learn that. And another thing that, she's taught me is that, people admire you, and I don't think of people admiring me, but there are people out there that do, and if I'm unkind to them, it could really hurt them, and so I have to take into account that when I'm meeting people publicly, I don't know what I mean to them. It's all an illusion, because they don't know you, but that doesn't mean you don't inspire them and mean something to them. So I try to learn from her and be very kind and not run away from people.
What advice would you give to a person just beginning to explore traditional witchcraft?
Well, I think the first advice anyone would give anyone is to do your research. Read all of the books that you can by all of the elders of witchcraft. Read books that were written, 80s, 70s, 60s. I'm not saying there aren't good books in the 90s, but there's a lot of regurgitated information out there now, and a lot of people come on and write books and say, oh, none of that old stuff's necessary anymore. Do what feels right. Do what feels right. Well, do it yourself. Witchcraft is all fine and good. Solitary witchcraft is all well and good. The only problem I have with solitaries is they're not solitary enough. They tend to go on and want community online, and they want to be accepted, and they get really insulted when, communities of witchcraft don't look at their witchcraft as the same thing. Well, in my mind, I respect everyone, as Maxime says, I respect everyone, and I think we should respect anyone who is going to take the perilous journey of magic and the craft and try to be a magical person and pursue the gods of witchcraft, even if they don't know their names, even if they don't have access to the actual book and teachings. They're still stepping on that perilous path. However, if you're going to profess solitary craft, well, be solitary, be private. In my mind, the only people solitary witches should work with is people who are coming to them to work their craft. I don't see why they need social acceptance. If I was going to be a solitary witch, I would be like, I don't need anyone's acceptance, and I wouldn't seek it either. For that matter, I don't know that community witches always need to seek it. All that matters is what's going on in your own circle. And if your circle's just you, well, there you go. You've got your own microcosm and macrocosm, and you don't need anyone else. Eclectic witchcraft is different. It's a different brand of witchcraft, It's virtually paganism, really, isn't it? Some people call it neo-Wicca, but they sometimes do form their own groups. They don't usually, sometimes they'll say it's a tradition, but it's usually just their coven, or they're just eclectic witches that like to go to pagan groups. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not the craft that I practice. And I think, have I steered away from the question?
No, these are all useful to the new person.
Well, research as much as you want and find out what's best for you. Don't listen to just one author or one person's opinion, and don't think that social media or Facebook is always the answer either, because there's a bullying factor online, to where you'll get groups of people who say this is how it is, and if you disagree with their version of it, well, they're just going to go on and on about it, If you want to know what witchcraft is, in my opinion, it's better to go to the source, Without Gerald Gardner's work, Gardnerian Witchcraft, without Alexandrian craft, no one would be sitting here having these conversations today. Period, point blank. So, if people want to consider witchcraft just a craft, just a magical practice, if that's their definition, then everyone who practices magic is a witch. Witch is the definition that was brought about in the 1930s by Christian archaeologists from Britain. And at that time, it was the British Empire, the largest empire in the world. It was the most dominant culture in the world, and it was the most dominant language in the world. So, of course, they used their word, witch. It's an English word. And they labeled it and smacked it on anyone who worked magic. They went to Africa, that's a witch doctor. That's a witch, that's witchcraft. These men were Christians. They didn't know anything more about witchcraft than their contemporaries, but it was an English word, so they slapped it on everything, Later, shamanism would come to replace that, Once again, that's not an indigenous word to those people. If you actually go to these people who are really practicing it, they don't want to be called witches. They don't want it to be called witchcraft. They want to go with their own language and their own, But how you choose to describe it, I don't care, But those are the two definitions of witchcraft. There's religious witchcraft, Margaret Murray coined it as operative witchcraft and ritual witchcraft. I switched that up to saying religious witchcraft and operative witchcraft, but it's the same thing, you know. Those two versions have always been around under certain definitions, you know, because witches do work. But if all a witch is somebody that works magic, then anyone who works magic is witch, you know. To us, witchcraft has a broader meaning than that, because it is a state in which you're working with particular deities and particular forces, and there are particular ways of working magic and particular things that we do, initiations that we go through that are entrances into the religion of witchcraft. Nowadays, there are people who practice religious witchcraft who are not initiates of the craft. They're do-it-themselves witches, you know, and that's become its own thing, general paganism, what have you. None of these things are wrong, but you have to decide for yourself what it is you want to do. And you have to understand all the narratives, now and then, and realize that they're all current. My husband was one of the people who decided he was going to bring back the word warlock, which is a great example of this. It gets everyone's panties in a bind, you know. There's been people who've threatened violence because, you know, we're okay with the word warlock. It's such an affront to them, you know. And it's not the initiates, you know. The initiates could care less. They might think it's silly, they might think it's cool. But, you know, we've got better things to do than worry about some word somebody's using. It's the pagans and the non-initiates who just freak out like it's an insult to their religion, you know. A religion that they were, you know, I'm not going to get into that. And I was having a conversation with Christian one day, and he said something to me I thought was very wise. And, you know, somebody online had said, well, you know, maybe warlock used to be an old pagan word. Maybe it used to be, but it's not anymore. Now it means this. It's changed. Well, if words change, they could change back. Words always change, you know. So you don't have to rely on the current definition just because a group of people has decided to tell you it, or a series of authors, most of which who are probably not initiated, decided to regurgitate that information, or a particular publishing company might have decided this is the narrative and all of our authors are going to use that narrative. You know, make the decision for yourself and realize history is recorded. It's not defined by the now, it's defined by what actually has been. That's what should make what is and what will be, in my opinion. But do your research, read all the books you can, and then decide what is witchcraft to you, what does that mean to you? And then strive for the thing that you actually want, and don't accept something less than. If you decide to join a coven, check their credentials, make sure they're really who they say they are. You know, if they say they're Gardnerian, make sure they're really Gardnerian. If they say they're Alexandrian, make sure they're really Alexandrian. And then I'd advise you to make sure that training is the priority. If training, how you're going to be trained, having high expectations of training, is not the first thing they discuss with you, or one of the current first things they discuss, if it's not their top priority, they're not going to do it. So don't bother. Getting initiated into a tradition and not actually being trained is completely worthless. Most of the time, one of two things happen. Either the person is disillusioned and leaves the craft anyway, or goes on to some other tradition hoping to get trained in that one, or they seek training with someone else. You know, these things happen, you know. Initiation itself is knocking on the door, you know, but it's the beginning of something. You've got to have the training, so you need someone who will actually give you the knowledge that you need to have. Anyway, I think that covers it.
I guess this kind of plays into your last response, but in regards to the craft, describe a pet peeve of yours.
How did you know? No, well, there are a few pet peeves. You know, there's pet peeves in the outer court of the craft, and then there's pet peeves in the inner court of the craft, you know. I suppose I ran across a pet peeve again recently, and it does kind of go into what we were just saying. There's a person in New Orleans who could represent people all over the world, particularly the United States, who has joined lots of clubs, you know, They're in, they've got their Gardnerian Hall Pass, their Alexandrian Hall Pass, their Welsh Traditional Hall Pass, their Minoan Hall Pass, etc., 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 etc. If that's not enough, then they entered every kind of ATR they can possibly think of, right? I think that's perfectly fine for somebody's personal journey. I'd hazard they're not getting training or truly dedicating to any of these things, because in truth these are all priesthoods, and in my opinion one only has the time to be a priest of one thing, truly to be a priest. If you take it to the serious level that other religions do, if you're a voodoo priest, that's probably a full-time job for you, so I don't see how you have the ability to be a rabbi and a Jesuit. I don't see how that's even possible. So I usually look at that person as sad, and they're probably chasing a dragon and they're not finding their spiritual fulfillment. But where it becomes a pet peeve is when they start passing this on to other people, because it becomes almost like a virus or an infection that needs to be cured. What ends up happening is they disillusion people with the craft. They've watered down all these traditions so much, they're not teaching anyone. They're generally handing out initiations like candy. If somebody comes to them, they're going to get whatever they want, several things. There was an ad recently somebody read to me, and they said, "We're all of these things. We can also give you Alexandrian initiation, but we don't really do that." I'll show you that later. And it's like, well, the poor individuals that walk away from that thinking, "I'm Alexandrian." If they ever actually meet any other Alexandrians, what's going to happen is they're going to realize they're not trained. The other Alexandrians are either going to feel really bad for them and try to help them, or they're going to not take them very seriously. And this goes for any tradition. And that person who did it is just going to end up looking really poorly to all those communities. And maybe they don't care. Maybe it's their intention to, spit in the face of everyone. But I think it's very sad. It's my pet peeve when people who should know better initiate people irresponsibly, because it's really terribly unfair to the person who is initiated, and it's unfair to them to not have the training. We're all entitled to make mistakes, and I'm not about telling people who they should or should not initiate, or who should or should not initiate you. That's between those two people. Unfortunately, there are people who are harmful to the craft and not good for the craft, and if you follow the breadcrumbs, they usually were initiated in the same way. They were handed multiple things by the same person for the wrong reasons. Perhaps because they were dating, perhaps because of something else. That, I think, is my biggest pet peeve on the outer court, That and the club, the whole club idea anyway. I think there's a lot of initiates out there that make being initiated into something a part of the club, and if you don't agree with the group, they're going to bully you and ridicule you. They don't respect each other as priests or priestesses. They don't respect each other's covens. They're very cruel to each other. And all it does is make seekers think that they look bad, that their tradition looks bad. It doesn't make them look good. And the people that want to join are people who want to be in some sort of club. They want to be in the in crowd. It rather reminds me of, high school. You want to be on the in crowd. You want to be with the jocks and the cheerleaders. So you're going to look like them, do what they say, mimic how they say, and you're going to bully the other kids. And you're not going to let everyone in. Don't think that's witchcraft. I think that that's insecurity, ego, and a weak one at that, and an inferiority complex. I'm not saying that right. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. I'm babbling so much.
There's so many good details. It's nice.
Inferiority. I can't speak today. Yeah.
The last question is, many members of the New Orleans Coven are very public about the craft. Do you think this is necessary these days, or should witches be more secretive and private?
I think it's changed. But yes, I think it's still necessary. and it's necessary in ways it wasn't necessary before, you know. When Gerald Gardner, Patricia Crowther, Eleanor Ray Bone, Lois Bourne, Alex and Maxine Sanders, and all the other, Doreen Valente, were working on books, being in newspapers, doing interviews, appearing on television, doing all the things that they did to expose the world to witchcraft. Well, they were the, you know, trailblazers. And it was necessary then because the world didn't know about witchcraft. And the unified mission was to teach the world that witchcraft was a religion, that we had gods, you know, we had a god and a goddess, that there was a goddess, that people worshipped a goddess, that we worked magic to heal and to help, that we were not evil, and that we did not worship the devil. That was the project, that was the goal, you know, and I think that for the most part it was very successful. However, there are still people in the world today who think that witches are evil. There's still people in the world today who think witches worship the devil. And now there's so many people, you know, proclaiming what witchcraft is that we've got a million different mission statements, you know. There are people out there who are saying all the stuff that the elders said isn't true, you know. Witches might worship the devil. Witches do evil. We're really actually quite badass, you know. You know, we hex. We're not afraid to hex you, you know. A different narrative entirely, and also, you know, there's still people who just aren't educated to it. So there's an oversaturation, which might make it less interesting, you know. As my teacher said, we're not such good copy anymore. But where I think it becomes very important for the new generations of traditional witches, Gardnerians and Alexandrians, it's not, I think people get afraid of being perceived as being egotistical, like, who do you think you are? You're not one of the elders, you know. You're not Gardner, no, you're not. You're not ever going to be those. There's never going to be another Alex Sanders. There's never going to be another Maxine Sanders. There's never going to be another Gerald Gardner. I'll tell you what, there will also never be another Brian Cain, or another Christine Stevens, or another Austin Shippey. Be your authentic self, and don't be afraid to represent that, because who knows what contributions you will bring to the craft if you're going to do that. Now, that being said, we meet new generations of witches every day who don't know who Gerald Gardner is, or people interested in the craft, you know, most of them aren't really witches. However, I have met a Gardnerian witch queen who said to me, she was an older one, I don't know what Doreen Valiente looks like. I've never seen a picture. She also didn't know the secret names of the gods beyond the Owen lines, which some people realize that those are different, you know, probably squeaking a few wheels with that comment. But there are people who don't know, you know, and what I found very useful, probably the most useful thing about our Facebook page, British Traditional Witchcraft, is the pictures that we post, more than anything, the pictures of the elders. Because the new generation comes in and they see that, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, and they say, that's witchcraft, that looks cool, it's not fat people in a park, you know. It's not a social justice warrior brigade. These people look cool, they look like occultists, and then they want to know more, and they want to read their books. A lot of the other things that go on in that group are, I think, a lot of those groups, most of the Facebook groups, it's the initiates either stroking each other's egos or arguing. Most of those groups are supposed to be for seekers, but if you go on there, it's just initiates arguing or initiates agreeing with each other, you know. And it happens in ours too sometimes, and that's just the way of it. But it's really for the seekers. They don't know, you know. Once they know who Maxine Sanders is, in that respect, my job's done, because they'll go and find groups where she's in, like Alexandrian Witchcraft, the Magic of Maxine and Alexanders. I'm saying that right? Sharon Day's group. You know, Maxine, she's in our groups, but she's got more of a presence on that one. You know, she's not a Facebooker. She does look and peek, though, sometimes. But people will go and, watch the videos, get Fire Child, read the books, and then they know her, that's done. Or they'll go read Gerald Gardner's books, it's not so much, posting pictures of myself. However, in the New Orleans Coven, I did make it about us, didn't I? I still post the pictures of the elders, but I think that we need to be relevant, because if we just rely and rest on the laurels of our elders, then no one's doing the work. It's not quite as the public work. The question was, should witches be secretive? Yes, they should be. There should be secret witches, and all witches should have a certain amount of secrecy. Our coven is the perfect example. We have a public platform, but we have secrets. Not only how we work our craft, but we've got members who are not on that poster. And no member of our coven has to be known. We will protect their identity with our life. We're not going to tell you. It's no one's business. And it's actually quite amusing to me that I've had a story of a priest who I ended up blocking him on Facebook because I decided he didn't exist in my universe anymore, because he decided to message my husband, to try to find out something about an alleged member of my coven. And I thought, you know the rules. You didn't come and ask me, you could try to be sneaky. And then that information would have been used for public, to publicly defame that person, and I suppose our coven too. It's no one's business, and so I thought, well, that initiate is not a proper initiate, and I don't want to know them anymore, and I'm not prepared to say the name. Well, I am prepared to say the name, but I'm not going to. But it's well liked in certain circles, and I think, no, it's a slimy thing to do, and it is against craft protocol. You don't go ask a non-initiate. They were clever enough to realize that the coven might be in my home, but it might not be in my home. But if it is in my home, then my husband may have eye-spied who the coven members are. But that's just, Anyway, next.
That's the last question.
Last question.
That was pretty
All
simple.
right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. We're going to try to interview some of the other members of the New Orleans Coven, and I don't know what other projects we'll do. I'm going to try to interview my teacher while she's here, but I don't know if she'll agree. All right. Blessings, everyone.